Cool. Hey, welcome everyone. Let me just mute that mic there. And cool. Thanks if you're tuning in on our Facebook feed. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. So today we're going to be discussing bipolar. It's Bipolar Awareness Day, everyone. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to have our the two psychologists, the two clinical psychologists at ARC, discuss, tell us what bipolar is, and give us a bit of an overview of it. So there's going to be a Q&A. So if you guys want to ask any questions, if you have anything you want to know about bipolar, please ask. Knock yourselves out. I'll see if I can post the questions if they come through. Otherwise, I'll just read them out. I am seeing them here. I saw Clinton was watching us. Thanks, Clint, for joining us. Ahmed and Polly, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. As you said, I'm Polly. I'm the clinical psychologist.
Thanks for having me too, Ryan. As you know, my name is Ahmed. I'm also a clinical psychologist.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Cool. Okay, so I think I'm going to start. Let me start with Polly. I'll start with you. Do you want to give us a quick overview of what bipolar is? And I'm going to hand it straight over to you. Cool.
Bipolar is a mood disorder, so dealing with a person's general mood. And the person's mood moves between major depressive episodes and then also moves into more the manic, erratic episodes. So in a very broad sense, it's a really a mood disorder that shifts between low depressive states and very high manic states. I don't know if you want a little bit more detail on the diagnosing or if Ahmed wants to take over.
Ahmed, do you wanna give us some more detail on that?
Sure. I think Polly gave a nice kind of blanket overview of what it is. If we mostly, when diagnosing bipolar, the major depressive episode doesn't necessarily have to be present. But if we look at the strictly kind of DSM-5 criteria, we're looking at a period of about 2 or more weeks, and there are certain markers. The two main markers would be the depressed mood and what we call anhedonia, which is the loss of interest in activities that were previously enjoyed. Along with that, depressed mood is a decreased or increased need for sleep, decrease or increase of appetite, some psychomotor agitation or psychomotor slowing, meaning slowed movement or increased movement, feelings of guilt. This can be related to really any kind of incident that has happened in the identified patient's life, and some suicidal ideation as well, and lack of concentration. Now, at least 5 of those symptoms need to be present for diagnosing a major depressive episode. And if we move on to the manic episode, that is 3 or more of the symptoms are present for at least a week or more. So depressive episode, 2 weeks or more, and a manic episode, a week or more. The manic episodes are characterized by goal-directed activity, whether that's financial, making new investments all of a sudden, making new sort of just an increase in goal-directed activity, very talkative, lots of flight of ideas. Like when you're in someone who can possibly be diagnosed with as having a manic episode, you'll see that they jump from one idea to the other very quickly. And of course, this is ruling out any other kind of diagnosis, whether it's adult ADHD or anything like that. The other parts of it are pleasurable activities, which lead to often painful consequences. And some of it is distractibility as well, and a decreased need for sleep. So that's what you're really looking at. And in order to diagnose, of course, it has to be causing, it has to be ruled out that it's caused by any other generalized medical condition, the effects of any substance or any medication, and it has to cause significant impairment in the person's life, in a few areas of life. Of course, sorry, I'm taking up a bit of time here, but
No,
there
carry on.
is the hypomanic episode as well. Now, the hypomanic, while the manic episode lasts, the symptoms have to be present for a week or more. Then the hypomanic, the symptoms usually would have to be present for 4 days or more. Once it reaches a week, then you could characterize it as a manic episode. But of course, with hypomanic episodes, they don't cause as significant impairment as a manic episode does. So the person can still function. So that's your basic breakdown of on the DSM-5 criteria for diagnosing.
Okay. So I wanted to ask, right? So look, I have ADHD, okay, and I know there's a mania that can sort of come with that, right? But it's very short lived, and there seems to be somewhat of an awareness around it. What I've people with bipolar, when they sort of have those 2 sets of manic episodes, do they always lack insight into what's going on, or are they aware of the mania? Do you wanna maybe answer that, Polly?
Okay. Well, it really depends on each patient. Each patient is, of course, very different from one another. And most of the time, patients might not be aware, but the people around them are noticing these really difficult behaviors that they're exhibiting, and behaviors that are so different from maybe the norm. So when the mood hits, whether it's a depressive one or a manic one, there's a very distinct difference between how they normally or originally usually behave. So then there is, with that distinct, then the people around them can really observe it. But to some extent, some patients do have some sort of insight into some of their difficulties that they're experiencing, maybe with certain symptoms that they're aware that they're dealing with or struggling with. And that's when we'll see a lot of some patients maybe self-medicating, especially patients who have bipolar. They have a very high comorbidity rate with a substance use disorder, because they're trying to alleviate either the low depressive states or to manage the manic states that they might be dealing with.
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting point, because I think we've actually discussed this before, Holly, where what came first really is because substance use can mimic in a lot of ways the symptoms of bipolar. Sorry, I just saw a comment come up and I got distracted. So yeah, do you want to maybe talk about that? Because I know sort of someone comes into treatment and they've been using stimulants, for example, and stimulants can make a person manic, right? So a person gets manic, and then obviously when they come down, they're going to get very depressed. And are the symptoms very closely related, or are they? Is there a distinct difference between those sort of issues? Do you want to answer that, Ahmed?
When it comes to stimulants, of course, in my experience, this is why differential diagnosis is so important. In that, especially in places of psychiatric hospitals or rehabs, addiction centers, treatment, what is so important is to rule out everything, because the last thing that you want to diagnose is a psychiatric disorder. It's the kind of last resort for diagnosis, because it's the thing that is most enduring in the person. It's whether it comes to mood, personality, anxiety, it's the one thing that is going to be the most difficult and the most take the longest to treat, whether that's through medication, whether that's through psychotherapy or anything like that. So that's the last thing you want to diagnose. You have to rule out everything else first, any medical, any psychiatric medication, which is why someone comes in and, you know, you've taken their history, you've taken their circumstances, their living circumstances. What you need to do is, you know, you do your tox screens, drug tests, anything like that, you know, family history, CT brain, MRI, the works, basically. Unfortunately, you know, patients can't always afford those kinds of tests. Medical aid doesn't cover them. So differential diagnosis becomes very difficult, especially in the public sector. But that's the thing that you want to do. And of course, clinical judgment experience is the thing that can say.
And that,
in terms
and,
of the,
yeah, and I suppose that doesn't sort of stop at the end of treatment. I suppose the person comes in, they do their detox, they're evaluated. Like you say, you do all of that investigating, gather all of the collateral information, and you know they continue with their process as an outpatient. And generally speaking, does the diagnosis happen at that point? Or do you see a lot of people coming in with a diagnosis from a previous doctor or treatment center? Or, should I hand that over to you, Polly? Do you want to answer that one? Oh, let me just unmute you. Sorry.
No problem.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
just to kind of chip in on that, you know, most mood disorders are chronic, whether it's major depression or whether it's bipolar mood disorder. They're very chronic. That's why some patients, like you say, will get a patient, then they've been referred to by another healthcare practitioner, and maybe they saw something else. And for the most part, you do take that into account, but you still have to do your own assessment. So really trying, like Ahmed said, trying to rule out anything, especially with something like bipolar. Bipolar can mimic a lot of symptoms that you might see with someone who's intoxicated with whatever upper or stimulant drug or maybe even alcohol. So it's so important to see, especially in inpatient care, to see when you take away all these substances, how is the patient's mood? And then also if you do other additional assessments, how is the patient's mood? And then you get a clear picture of the patient. And then also obviously getting a little bit of collateral and some history on the patient to see how their mood has been. Maybe you might be getting them at a very depressive state, and then you might be tempted to diagnose them as major depression, but actually they are given treatment, and then you see the manic state maybe a week or two later. So then that's why it's so inpatient care is just so important, because you get a real good full picture of the patient that's sitting in front of you. And then of course doing a full assessment, doing the collateral, getting that history from the family and friends, and then also using the notes that you've seen from other healthcare practitioners and what they've seen as well. And then also sometimes talking to the patient themselves. Sometimes, like I said earlier, some patients have some sort of insight into what goes on with them, and really questioning them on what they experience on a daily basis.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Polly. Cool. So, Ahmed, you mentioned the phrase differential diagnosis. Do you want to tell our viewers what that phrase means, if that's okay?
Okay, so differential diagnosis is, I mean, to put it in simpler terms, it's the process of ruling out an elimination, anything that could better explain their symptoms or their presentation of behavior. For example, someone who's come in on let's give a really simple example. Someone who's coming in presenting with the symptoms of a manic episode, meaning they've got flight of ideas, meaning they've got goal-directed activity, meaning they've got any kind of... Now, this is up to the person, the healthcare practitioner's experience. Let's say this practitioner has a wide variety of experience in public sector, in private sector, in addiction, anything like that. Now, someone who's inexperienced is going to say, hey, I know what the DSM says. I know what this is presenting like. You rule out whether it's going to be causing significant impairment. This looks like a manic episode. Someone else is going to come in and say, wait, hold on, let's find out more. Let's rule out now. This is what the process of differential diagnosis is. First, you need your MDUT, your multi-drug urine test. Now the test came back positive for cocaine. Like, okay, now I've started the process of differential diagnosis. This is the effect of cocaine. So we rule out manic episode. So it's like you got a list and then you're like basically crossing out a manic episode.
So I
Now
know,
let's say
sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
Carry on.
No
Actually,
problem.
finish that thought. Finish that thought.
No, it's all right, Ryan.
You don't interrupt.
Now let's say the person has detoxed. They off the meds and everything, and I mean they off the cocaine. They've been clean for a while, and then they come in again with presenting symptoms of a manic episode, or maybe a depressive episode, and now you're thinking, okay, now could this be bipolar? Because what I've done is I've already ruled out one thing. I've ruled out any medical history. Now let's look at a mood disorder. It's quite a long process, and it's tiresome for the patient as well. And I think what Polly said is really great. What you need to do is you need to get the patient's experience, because someone who's addicted to cocaine has a very different experience to someone who has possibly a diagnosis of bipolar mood disorder, whether it's type 1 or type 2. They need to like give you their experience. What is it like living with this thing? How long have they been living with it? If they just took cocaine for the first time, then it's not likely a cocaine addiction. It's not really that. It's sometimes you get goal-directed activity. And remember, one of the criteria I said for a manic episode is pleasurable activity, which leads to painful consequences. Now, a pleasurable activity would be taking cocaine. The two can like sort of reinforce each other.
So just quickly, Ahmed, on that note, I wanted to ask you. Sorry, Polly, I'm going to get to you in a quick minute. I just so I know in children ADHD, the differential diagnosis for ADHD, I've read this is oppositional defiance disorder. I think it is. Okay. So just to understand the term differential diagnosis, is there always in psychology, or in the literature, is there always a specific diagnosis that is the differential diagnosis, or obviously it can be a spectrum of things, but is it usually one thing?
That's, I don't know, in my experience, I haven't had much experience with working with ADHD at an adult level and a children level, so can I defer to Polly on this one?
Okay, so Polly, let me just quickly rephrase my question there. So I read in this book that I don't have it with me. Jeez. Anyway, the differential diagnosis for ADHD is I don't know if they meant to say that it's usually oppositional defiance disorder in children, or if it is always oppositional defiance disorder, as the alternative. So yeah, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, no, definitely. With most diagnoses, there will always be like a criteria that says this diagnosis that you're giving mustn't be able to be better explained by another diagnosis. So,
Yes.
for
Okay.
example, with a child who's maybe got a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder, are the symptoms maybe not better explained by ADHD? And that's where a multidisciplinary team comes in. That's really, really quite important. And also getting a little bit more history on the patient themselves as well, from whether it's the parents or other family members or people that have a lot of contact with the patient, to just kind of see, to differentiate, to truly differentiate, is this ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder? And if the symptoms can be better explained by another diagnosis, then we try and treat that diagnosis. Of course, if within a certain period of time that the symptoms don't alleviate with the treatment that we're giving the patient, then maybe we can go back to the drawing board with the multidisciplinary team, whether it's the psychiatrist, psychologist, and anyone else that's working with the patient, and see maybe there's a different diagnosis going on here. Because yes, at times it does matter. Some things really do overlap at times. For example, what I wanted to add when Ahmed was talking about the substance and the differentiation with another mood disorder. Symptoms can occur where during intoxication, then symptoms might appear as a mood disorder. And then when you wait a few days after the intoxication goes down, then a patient goes through withdrawal symptoms. And in there, that can also induce mood-like symptoms as well. So that's why it's always really so important to keep assessing the patient. And that's why during inpatient care, we see the patient daily just to see if there's any changes in the assessment and the results of the assessment, and also in the treatment. Is the treatment working, or is the patient regressing in some way or improving in some way? Just to make sure that there isn't a differential diagnosis or disorder that can better explain their symptoms.
Thanks,
I
Polly.
don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't. Oh, there we go. So no, that makes sense. So I wanted to ask you, Polly. I remember a patient coming through from Zambia came to ARC, and he was there for a couple of weeks, and he was 100%. What looked to me like what you guys are describing as the symptoms of bipolar. He had a manic episode, and he was a very, very big guy, and he sort of like he was running around sort of he ended up on the roof, and it was like it really got out of control. One of the very few moments of that to that extent, right? And it really looked like he was really hallucinating. He was, calling out to God, and he was staring at the sun. And it took about 4 guys from the emergency services to get him down and sort of get him under control. Are bipolar episodes always? It looked to me like a very sort of extreme sort of case of mania. Are they always that extreme, or does it happen on a spectrum?
So with bipolar, there is 2 types of bipolar. There is the bipolar 1, and then there's the bipolar 2. And how they are differentiated is that with bipolar 1, there is usually the manic episode. And in that manic episode, it sounds like what you're describing, Ryan, where there's a bit of delusions, maybe even delusions of grandeur, okay? Thinking that you have some sort of level of invincibility, or that you're able to communicate with a higher power. That sense of grandiosity, right, which is a delusion, and that is a form of psychosis. It's part of psychosis. So when there is any kind of form of psychosis, whether he's seeing or hearing things that aren't there, which are hallucinations, or he has these strange beliefs of grandeur, that will count under mania, manic episode. Then there's the other form of, I think Ahmed touched on this, which is the hypomania, which is a lesser form, to say it generally, of mania, where it's not as long, the duration is different, where manic episode might be a week, and the hypomania might be 4 days or more. The moment it reaches a week, then it's part of bipolar 1, it's more the manic part. But with hypomanic, that is part of the bipolar 2. So with bipolar 2, you experience the depression, but now with hypomania. Hypomania is shorter, it's about 4 days or more, and there isn't any kind of psychosis, right? You still have that hyperactivity, the decreased need for sleep, that overspending, and all those symptoms that Ahmed mentioned there. But there isn't any kind of psychosis as well. So that's the difference. With bipolar 1, there's the major depressive episode and also the manic episode. But sometimes some patient will only present in bipolar 1 with just mania, and not always with the depression. With bipolar 2, then the patient has the depression, but the hypomania, the lesser form of the manic episode.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Polly. Cool. Let me just mute that again. Sorry. We got a question from Facebook. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Hi, living with bipolar myself. I know every single day is an emotional roller coaster. I can be in a very happy mood to be really irrational to being very depressed. That is what I call my bitch switch. Okay. Along with that, I also have physical and mental disability and ADHD, which is where my addiction comes in. Having had several brain operations, I suffer from chronic pain, which is the need for pain medication. This is also where I got addicted to codeine and thus being diagnosed with. It looked like a very long message, and we weren't able to post all of it. But yeah, it sounds like there is a lot going on there. Ahmed, any comments on from your end on that comment?
Oh no, my heart goes out to the person who posted that. That is a lot to deal with. You know, where we talk about, if we just go back to differential diagnosis. Now this is like bipolar, and she's got a number of other comorbidities. Now on any day, it's going to be a sorry. Was it a male or female who posted that?
I can't
Do we
see.
know?
No, I can't see. Well, I'm not gonna speculate.
Okay, all right. The viewer who was watching, you know, it's going to be so difficult for them each day when something happens, when a new symptom presents. Let's say, for example, there's some impulsivity happening over there, and it might be a moment of impulsivity, it may be a moment of hyperactivity. If it's just a moment, if it just lasts that moment, you can say, okay, this is a symptom of ADHD, which the viewer said that they were diagnosed with. And then again, you got to look, okay, how long is this impulsivity lasting? How long is this goal-directed activity, or flight of ideas being? And then is that okay? Now are they in a manic episode? So it's almost, you know, their life is going to become a series of differential diagnosis, which is going to be extremely difficult to live with. I mean, they probably already have lived with it for so long, and you know, being passed from one healthcare practitioner to another. You know, it's not a, and it's not. I mean, with no malice or ill intent to the viewer, no practitioner is going to want to take on their case very willingly, which is quite tough. You know, this is the kind of cases that create a sense of cynicism and jadedness in mental health.
Okay, I hear you. So yes, okay. There's a lot going on. So I see she mentions her name, Sophia. She says hi, Ahmed. So I'm not sure if you know who it is, but I completely agree. I think it looks like there's a lot going on, and there's always hope. And it looks like they. I mean, if they're tuning into this, it looks like they seem to want to sort of be part. I think they tuned in from the Maria Cafe. The Maria Cafe group, so it looks like they're on that group and they are looking for help and doing something about it. So thanks for that. Thanks for your comments, Sophia. I appreciate it. So Ahmed, just from your side, any closing thoughts? I'm gonna move over to you with the last thought, Polly. That's okay.
I think, you know, I've spoken to patients before who have been diagnosed with mood disorders, and bipolar is probably the toughest thing because, you know, if we think on even like a philosophical level, we as human beings, we like stability. We like a sense of regulation in ourselves. We like an ability to, you know, keep things stable. So if a person's been diagnosed with major depressive disorder, that is going to be far easier to handle than bipolar because it's such a roller coaster. You don't know when your mania is going to happen. Let's say, for example, you had a manic episode, you engaged in some really risky activity, and then you reach your depressive episode and you realize the consequences that have come about from the actions you carried out in your manic episode. And then that's when we watch out for suicidality. That's when we watch out for what are they actually going to do. absolute roller coaster. It's difficult to treat because mood stabilizers like lithium and lamotrigine and the others, uh, they are chronic medications. They are things that dull you to such a point of, your mind is trying to be tricked into being stabilized, but it's extremely difficult to live with something that takes you on a path that human beings are not actually naturally predisposed to. So I think, and it's actually less, especially bipolar type 2, it's not picked up as often as it should be.
Okay. I think, so just before we move to Polly, I know, if I'm not mistaken, Kanye West is, from what I hear, he has been diagnosed with bipolar. He's open and honest about that. I don't know if you've heard about that, but I was watching this video where they strung together a bunch of tweets that he'd written, and they were all like just so incredibly grandiose, and it just it reminded me of you mentioned going on a this major manic episode and kind of like behaving in ways and doing things and getting in trouble and then coming down from that and realizing sort of what happened. That must be scary, especially obviously where there's no substances involved. It's just that must be so incredibly scary for people. Holly, I'm going to move over to you. Thank you, Ahmed, for that parting thought. Holly,
Sure.
any parting thoughts from your end?
Yes, when people do hear bipolar or any kind of mental illness, it's almost like a hopelessness that sometimes comes over people. And even though, yes, it is most diagnoses might be chronic, like with bipolar, it is a chronic disorder. But I really don't think all hope is lost. I know people do get frustrated with, especially with bipolar. It takes long to get diagnosed. And on top of that, it feels like you're in and out of the doctor's office or the psychiatrist and the psychologist office, trying to get the right medication, trying to get the right treatment. And it might feel very frustrating because, like Ahmed said, some of the treatment that you're given might have some side effects. But with the right practitioner and right team behind you, and with the right amount of patience, when you finally get the right kind of treatment for you, the right combination of medication with the lifestyle change on your own, plus the psychotherapy, by then, whatever diagnosis you might have, it is manageable, whether it's bipolar 1, bipolar 2, or whatever other mood disorder or any other psychiatric, psychological disorder. It is all quite manageable. Just don't give up, especially with the medications with the bipolar. Sometimes they have to use different medications. Sometimes they might default medication, then come back on, and then it's very difficult to manage and stabilize them again. So all of that can really cause a lot of frustration in the patient, which is absolutely frustrating. And I can honestly understand it. If it were me that has to change medication the whole time, it could be really frustrating and disheartening as well. But don't be disheartened, because once you get the right combination, then life is really quite manageable. It's not this horrible thing that has to have this bad stigma, and it's not a disability. Really, it's just disorders that can be manageable disorders. So that's really basically what I want people to take away from this, especially if you may be going through a journey where you're back and forth from the doctor or the psychologist or the psychiatrist. Don't lose hope and be patient with yourself.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Polly. I think that was very well said. Just also on another note, I want to say thank you very much for everything that you've done at ARC. You're moving on to newer frontiers, and I think we're going to miss you very much. And I just wanted to say thank you. And I'm sure that I saw today the rest of the team is definitely going to miss you. So yeah, thank you for everything. Cool, and good luck for the future. Yeah. All right, so okay, no, that was the wrong button. All right, guys. So I just want to, in closing, I just want to say thank you to Ahmed and Polly for joining us and for answering those questions. I think there was a lot of insight that our viewers would have gained from that. I think it's a very, very big thank you. And in closing, I just want to say to everyone that's listening or watching, if you are looking to get engaged in an aftercare program with other individuals that are on a journey of self-discovery as well, we've got the My Rehab Cafe initiative. You can reach out to me on my cell phone number, which is 082. I think I've got a banner here. Let me see. I don't have a banner for that, but 082-886-3996. Send me a WhatsApp message and then I'll get you added to the group. There's a lot of hardworking people in there that are all working very hard to stay engaged with everybody and work towards positive outcomes. So check that out. It's very interesting. There's a lot of stuff on the ARC page for that. So thank you guys. Thanks again for joining. And with that, I'll end the live broadcast. Thank you. Cool. Thank you. Cheers.